Welcome back. I'm Shane, and this is Relative Time. A few months ago, I took a look at a watch that I thought was one of the best budget Fliegers I'd ever seen. Yet after that review, I received a surprising number of comments that all said the same thing. That I needed to check out the Fliegers made by a brand called Escapement Time. That they were just fantastic for the price, and a brand that more people should know about, with a great looking glossy dial and nicely blued hands. So I took a look at them. And they are exactly that. Now, Escapement Time is a brand on AliExpress, but unlike a lot of other Ali brands, they can only be found on one store. And the Escapement Time store doesn't have a whole lot of models, so I'm kind of thinking they are a rather small operation. Now, at the time, there were two models that really caught my eye. There was a classic automatic Flieger for $90 and a Quartz Chrono Flieger for about $70. Since I couldn't quite decide on which one I wanted to see, I wound up buying both. Eventually I'll get around to reviewing that automatic version, but today I wanted to focus on the Chrono, as a Flieger Chrono isn't something you typically see. Now before we really jump into this, I want to give a quick shout out to Honest Watch Reviews, aka Number One Viper. Not only is he a longtime viewer and subscriber, but I think he was the first to cover these watches on his channel, and those reviews were one of the reasons I decided to give these a shot. So size-wise for the Chrono, we're looking at a 40mm wide watch. It's actually just over that without, and 44.4 with the crown. Lug to lug is sitting a tad longer than I would like at 49.4, but total thickness isn't too bad at 11.3. And that does include the embossed case back and the flat sapphire crystal. Water resistance is also pretty good here, sitting at 100 meters, although it is worth noting that neither the crown or the pushers are screwed down, so you should be able to take this swimming, just don't play with it in the water. Rounding out the specs, you have a 20mm lug width, Miyota 6S to 1 quartz movement, and a total weight of 70 grams on its leather strap. So it has a nice solid feel to it, but it's not overly heavy on the wrist. Now, on my 7-inch wrist, there is a little bit of an overhang, and that's all thanks to that longer lug to lug. But overall it is pretty comfortable, and has a pretty big presence, as Fliegers tend to do. It's only 40mm wide, but that dial takes up most of that width, where there's only a minimal amount of case and bezel acting as a border. Now at $70, this is obviously a budget-friendly watch. So when it comes to the case design and the finishing, you shouldn't really expect a lot. But whatever this Chrono Flieger has, Escapement Time did a pretty good job with it. The case is a stainless steel, and it has an entirely brushed finish. The sides have a linear brushing that sort of draws your eyes across the case, while the top and the bezel have more of a circular finish, which really just frames that dial. It's very much a straight tool watch style design. The bottom of the lugs have a little bit of a sharp right angle, yet the rest of the watch, and especially the side, has a really nice finish that is smooth to the touch with almost a satin look. One aspect that I really like here is the knurling on the onion-shaped crown, which is not only appropriate for a Flieger, but it also gives it a great texture, which adds more bite when you want to grab on and use it. Although, since this is a quartz piece, you won't be using it too often, as opposed to the Chrono pushers, which might be the whole reason you're buying this thing. With this particular Chrono and the movement, you have two subdials. The central second hand on the main dial is for the chronograph, while the subdial at the 9 is for minutes elapsed, whereas the subdial at the 3 is for the running seconds of the time. Now, in order to use it, just like any Chrono, you push the button at the top to start and stop it, while the pusher at the bottom then resets the whole thing. Although, since this is a Quartz Chrono, the reset isn't going to be automatic, and those pushers don't have a whole lot of feel or response when you engage them. And that might be the biggest negative I have for this watch, but it's completely expected at this price. And one major benefit of a Quartz chronograph is if the hands ever get misaligned while using them, it is pretty easy to reset them. While the case has a simple design, it's pretty well executed for the price. Yet it's the dial and the hands here that really set this watch apart. While the steel die Flieger I looked at just had a simple flat black dial, this one is a gorgeous glossy black. It can be a bit more reflective, but it's so much more interesting to look at. The overall design here is that of a Type A Flieger, but it's one that's been modified for the chrono. You have your standard minute track that goes along the edge, but only the 1, 5, 7, and 11 hour indicators are visible, as well as the standard Flieger triangle at the 12. The other indicators are replaced with the 2 subdials, as well as a date at the 6. Now, nothing is applied here, it's just a rather thick application of paint. Yet when you combine that with the deep, dark, glossy dial, it gives the watch a surprising amount of depth. For the central second and subdial, you have simple white sticks for hands. Yet the hour and minute hand have a heat-treated blue coating, which is another thing that really sets this watch apart. Typically, hands in this price range are going to be simpler or just look a bit rougher and macro, whereas here, they just look great. In lower lit conditions, you might not notice the blue as much, but when you do, it just looks gorgeous against the black backdrop. Although, for whatever reason, I think the hands on the automatic look better and are much more obvious than that of the chrono. Perhaps it's because the hands are bigger, or maybe it's just because of that second hand with the blue counterweight. But whatever it is a noticeable difference. Now, compared to a traditional Type A Flieger, I think the dial is a bit more crowded. Although probably not more crowded than your Type B Flieger. But as a whole, I think it's a good looking and highly functional design. It's not a very complex design, but one that is executed beautifully for its price. Yet there is one thing here that I really don't like about it, which really comes down to the choice of having 2 different white colors on the dial. You have more of a pure white on the subdial in the hands, versus this off-white or yellowish indices and minute track. Usually when a brand is using that, white, yellow, or old radium coloring, they're doing it to try to give it something of a vintage feel. And I think that would really succeed here if it wasn't for that pure white sitting right next to it. And I think it's really obvious when you look down at the 6, and you see the transition from the minute track to the white framing of the date, as well as the pure white on the date wheel itself. For me, I think it just clashes and doesn't really work, and they should have just gone with one or the other. Now, I wouldn't consider this a deal killer in any way, just a bit of a distraction. Now, the lume here is not quite as good as I would like, and considering the rest of the watch, it's kind of a disappointment. One thing I like is that they did lume the subdials as well as the date framing, but those 2 sections don't stay lit up very long. The main thing to watch in this comparison is how it compares to the Vostok on the left and the automatic version on the right. And I was glad to see that the automatic performed a lot better. Now, this isn't really a diver, so you don't need a ton of lume, but as you can see, the hands fade out just a little bit before a Vostok Amphibia, and that's a watch that I use as my baseline for just okay. So if I had to grade this one, I'd probably give it a C-. Whereas with the automatic, I'd give it a B+, maybe an A-. Now, as for the movement, we are looking at a Miyota 6S21. And as I said, it's a quartz movement, and it's a pretty decent one at that. I think they run about $20 to $30 by themselves. The chrono hands move at 4 beats a second, and I think as a whole it should have about 3 years of battery life. I think a hand-winding Seagull chronograph option would be kinda cool here, but when it comes to reliability, it is hard to beat a quartz movement. And as for the strap, both watches come with the same brown leather pilot-style strap with this white stitching. Overall, as inexpensive straps go, this is pretty good. The orange backing is kind of an odd choice, but the leather itself has a nice supple feel to it. There might be just a little bit of a break-in period, but overall it's pretty flexible from the get-go. Plus, it has a pretty decent buckle as well. At this price you don't usually expect much, but this one is pretty good for what it is. Which I think in some ways kind of sums up the watch as a whole. It's a simple design, but one that's executed beautifully for its price, which is really what a Flieger is supposed to be. So I think it's pretty hard to go wrong with either of these. If you just happen to be looking for a Flieger in these sizes, then these are 2 that are definitely worth checking out. And I think these are some of the best looking under $100 watches I've seen. Now, between the 2, I personally would go with the automatic Flieger, partly because I like the Type B dial design better, but also because of the better lume and the consistent color scheme. Although right now I don't think they have a lot of either of these in stock. so don't be surprised if you wind up seeing these sold out. But if you are interested, these are ones to keep an eye on in the future. Anyway, that's my take on the Escapement Time Flieger Chrono. I'll try to get a review up of the automatic pretty soon, but I'm not quite sure when. As well as later on this year, I'm kind of thinking about getting a nicer German Flieger and maybe comparing them. I'm pretty curious to see how these stack up. But in the meantime, you all know the drill down below. Let me know what you think about this watch in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.